Sorry, I should be laughing. I laughed at the wrong point when you said homelessness.
Hi, I'm Andy.
And I'm Roger.
And welcome to The Middle,
where we try to have thoughtful conversations
about awkward topics
on our search to find the middle.
That's fatphobic.
I don't feel war. I just own halfway to Siwa.
A few moments ago, Buckingham Palace announced the death of Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II.
I act as if God exists.
Put your masks on.
How dare you! You have stolen my dreams and my childhood with your empty words.
G'day, Roger. Happy Sunday morning.
Hi, Andy. We're at a different time now for this week.
But you still got the light on in the background, I can see.
Yeah, that's just for effect. But we usually have this at really late at night, right? We usually record late at night. And I always wondered in the back of my mind, even though we are both night owls, whether it affected our ability to think and to, have a certain level of conversation.
It depends how many drinks you have and how long your day at work was on the same day.
Yeah, so Sunday morning now, all the good people are at church, which in the Hills District is pretty much everyone, and we are here to talk about charities.
That's an interesting segue because I think in history it probably would be true that religious organizations probably accounted for most of the historic levels of charitable giving, or at least it was through those institutions. But now that we're all atheists, or at least really bad Christians or Catholics or whatever, I don't know what's happened. It's fallen off a cliff, has it?
Yeah, I think like when you have, when you have a system where they literally have a bag, and sometimes the bag's on the stick because there's benches of people sitting at the church congregation, and they almost like put it in front of your lap. The conditions are perfect for giving, but it has been less successful, obviously, since with COVID and everyone's doing remote kind of church sessions, right?
Yeah.
So people are less inclined to give, and it's like, oh yeah, you can set up a direct debit and all that kind of stuff, but it's just not the same as that little crappy velvet bag being shoved in your face and everyone watching what's going into the bag. Especially if you're part of an Asian church, which I've spoken about before. That's where my experience lies. It's a big thing, in Asian culture to be shouting, trying to haggle and pay for the bill. It's all about showing that face, right? So
do people haggle over how much to give? Like it's like, I won't give you like 10% of my income, but how about 5%?
No, it's the other way around. It's actually the uncles trying to hover that $100 bill a little bit too long so that people can see it going into the bag, right? And I think we're going to talk about that today. Like when charity, has a noble goal, but a lot of it also has the social benefits of wanting people to know that you are generous, that you are doing the right thing, right? So I've often seen that, that one flashy uncle wearing the gold Rolex hovering that $100 bill a bit too long for people to see it going into the church bag.
All right, so where should we start? I think there's a few things we want to cover today.
Well, I actually want to start something personal, and that's like the attitude towards those hustlers on the street, right? Like, because I think to me that's the strongest experience that most people have with charities, right? It's the pestering, the really aggressive salespeople that accost you in the supermarket or in the shopping mall in the street. And, I went to uni in the city in Sydney, and there used to be this 100-mile stretch to get to my block. And it was just the gauntlet. It was like Thunder Road for all charities, and they would just kind of really get you. And you could always tell the people who were used to it not, because they're, it's like dealing with any person accosting you in public. But what's your experience or your thoughts on those really aggressive charity people that just grab you off the street?
Well, the best thing about wearing headphones virtually any minute I have alone walking the streets is that you have a really plausible reason to ignore them without seeming rude. So, and they don't tend to approach me.
Really?
Maybe I've just got my eye contact strategically gazed away from anywhere near them. But I've had, you have, they'll, even when you've got your headphones in, some will even still try. And you've just sort of got to, pretend you didn't hear them or whatever. But I suppose maybe even more like a fundamental question is like, is that a good practice or a bad practice? And I think, there's lots of like negative press associated with, and I think they, referred to colloquially as chuggers, charity muggers. And, it really, there's like a negative connotation about what they do. And I think where this intersects with, a lot of the controversy, it's not just that they're annoying. It's also that these people on the street who collect money are actually paid to do that. So, I think maybe at a time, I don't know whether 20, 30 years ago is the right amount of time to refer to, but you'd have people like Salvation Army, or you'd have other people who would volunteer, and they would people collecting money or soliciting donations, they would be volunteers who would be giving up their time, and that was sort of the history of it.
Yeah.
And then at some point it became like almost a commercial operation where there are actually businesses that specialize in finding staff to man the streets and collect money on behalf of charities.
I feel like they should have to disclose that too in a bit more, in a different way, right? Because to me, it doesn't help that they're wearing those little vests as well, because I feel like they go back to their closet and they've got a vest for Uber Eats, they've got a vest for like Deliveroo, and then they put on their UNICEF vest, and it's just all like this weird gig economy thing. And it really turns me off, right? And yeah, they approach me. I mean, I have the little AirPods when I'm walking around the street. So I think maybe the bigger the headphones, maybe the more they leave you alone, but they always like try to talk through the headphones to me. And I just hate how aggressive they are. And I actually feel really sorry for the people who do get caught up in it, right? Because I don't know if you know anyone where like they are the nicest person in the world, but they just really struggle with confrontation. And so they always get caught in the web of these charity people. And I just feel for them. I'm like, I just wish I was there. I knew you well enough to stand up for you and say, no, he's busy or she's busy, leave her alone, like stay away. But they don't, because they're nice. And I just feel like the whole system, much like a lot of this network sales and cold call sales, is built on kind of prying or targeting these weaker or more amiable kind of people, right? They're like, we know people don't like confrontation. They know they don't like saying no or disappointing people. So this is the strategy on how to extract the dollar. And yeah, I hate that side of it. And it really turns me off, right?
Yeah. I mean, look, I guess the difference between, say, Tupperware sales and chuggers, if you like, is that I guess there is something intrinsically good about what they're doing, even if they use or leverage some of these tactics, right? So I suppose one view might be that if these sorts of strategies can just, for example, double the income of a charity, then even if, yes, they are kind of getting the money from people who are a little bit more open to being accosted in this way and respond to it in a not necessarily the negative way that you or I spoke about, that's still sort of pursuing, a good thing. And I guess one of the things with this, and the reason it's exploded, is that it is hard for charities to grow their income, and this is an effective way for them to do it. And is this like the rod for our backs that we need as a society? Like, is this like, because if we're not giving any other way, maybe we do need these people on the street to accost us and encourage us to do more than what we're currently doing without it, I guess.
What's your attitude going back to the fundamentals that you laid out? Like, why should we give? Do we have an obligation to give? Because I must admit that comes from a much more religious background for me growing up, that it was part of what you were taught, that you had an obligation to give money to the church and also other people. But we pay taxes, we do other things, we help the people that are closest to us. What in your mind is there a social contract here?
Well, let's put to one side like the role of government versus the role of charity, and just look at the basic example of should you have to give, right? And Derek Parfit is a philosopher, and he has this interesting line where he really doesn't like the term give, right? And the reason he doesn't like the term give is because it's premised on the notion that it's yours to begin with, right? That if you have money or if you're privileged, that somehow that's yours to give, right? So to give something, it needs to belong to you. And now it might be legally yours, but is it morally yours is where his point, right? So to give an example to kind of illustrate the point, in a rich country like Australia, or, any sort of developed country on the planet, really, you're going to be very well off compared to, say, the global average, right? So, and then indeed there's many people who are well below the global average as well. So there's nothing unique about us or special about us that's earned our privileged status, right? that we have money, that we've got, disposable income, right? There's nothing that we've done to earn that. And equally, there's nothing that less privileged people have done to earn their less privileged status, right? So the notion that we should give something is, in his mind, it's almost like we're stealing if we don't give it. So it's kind of a flip, like it kind of reverses it a little bit. And yeah, so I think there's definitely some ethical arguments, and it's a little bit more complicated than just this notion that, you shouldn't have to give, or it's your choice, that actually you do have a moral obligation to give to the world's most pressing causes, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, just because I'm wearing a red hat doesn't mean I'm a communist, but that does sound into the road of, challenging private ownership.
Well, it's not so much challenging private ownership. I mean, no one's saying that. It's not about saying the property rights are not there. Of course, they are there legally. That's not what's being debated. But a moral obligation to give is, I suppose, a separate question, which is, well, if you had $100, should you spend that $100, I don't know, buying what would you, a nice meal at an expensive restaurant, although you might need a couple $100 for it nowadays.
3 American coffees.
Yeah, 3 American. Or might you better spend that money saving the life of a child in Africa, right? And it's kind of, when you look at it through that kind of dichotomy, it's hard to kind of, in some ways, sort of feel good about yourself spending the money on something as frivolous as, maybe a meal.
Not anymore, Andy. Thanks a lot. But maybe let's kind of skip over to that, right? So if you've got an obligation, where does the obligation end then, right? So if you're someone who wants to help by donating a portion of their income, is that where the obligation stops from there? Do you then wipe your hands from it, or do you think that it extends to understanding what is achieved with that money?
Well, I think, okay, so like an obligation to give is really premised on that, it's a step towards, equalizing in some ways, arbitrary advantage and disadvantage is like hard to, morally, extract yourself from that obligation, right? Now, I suppose the question on, like, do you need to know where your money goes? That's more like a functional instrumentalist sort of argument, where it's like, well, you give, but you need to make sure you're giving to causes which yield sort of actual benefits. So, maybe if one was to say that, like, let's say you consider yourself to be very fortunate, that you earn a high income, and you say to yourself, well, I earn, let's say, 30% more than the average. So, I'm lucky. I've got everything I need, so I should donate that 30% to charity, right? To equalize, right, with the average. And then let's say you then decide that you want to donate to, I don't know, a charity that gives puppies lovely new bed places to sleep or something, right? A charity that, I'm picking that as just an example of a charity that doesn't really ameliorate the kinds of things that, suffering in the world. Then you can say, well, actually, you donating to that charity is not actually contributing to the goal of equalizing. So maybe you need to choose a charity where the benefits are really clear, where there's evidence that they actually do deliver the impact that they promise. And, maybe even if you donated 10% instead of 30% to, like, 10% to a more effective charity, that's actually going to have a more profound impact than, donating to your frivolous puppy bed charity sort of thing.
Yeah, I think that's true, right? It's like most people, I think, feel like it stops there, right? It's just something that they do, and once they've given the money, they can move on their day, they can feel good about themselves, and But there are problems with that, like you said, that trying to understand what happens with that money and whether there's any actual outcome. I feel that. I mean, what in terms of preparing for this chat, I actually did try to find a little bit more about where the money goes. And I'm not sure if you've tried to track that through. Now, we're probably a little bit luckier in Australia because the watchdogs and reporting bodies do make it a little bit easier. But I would say that looking at it more globally, it's very, very hard to determine how much money is actually spent on direct causes. Yeah. And so there are many, many famous examples of somewhere between, like, as little as, 1 cent on the dollar, up to kind of like, 10, 15 cents on the dollar that's donated actually going to direct causes. Now, is this just an outsider looking in, just being a bit naive about what it takes to raise money? Maybe, but I don't like those stats. Like, how would you react to those kind of things?
I've no doubt that there are really quite fraudulent charities out there, or ones that maybe have a mission but haven't quite worked out yet how to deliver on the mission. So they raise all this money, and it's not clear actually how they're achieving their goals. I know that. Well, I'd say two things. One is there are organizations which go and track charities and give them ratings, and one of the things that they rate them for is transparency and clear links between the dollars that you give and the outcome. So GiveWell is one example of an organization which assesses and rates charities in that way, and they usually come up with charities like the Against Malaria Foundation, which provides bed nets to families or children in Africa. And the bed nets are, I don't know how much they cost, but they're, probably only a couple of dollars a pop, but they can track through, your dollars versus how many nets they provide. They know where the nets are going. It's very clear where the nets are going. So they get very high ranking in terms of transparency. But then on the other hand, you wouldn't want 10 billion, bed nets, right? So we need a mix of different things, right? So we do need to cover other areas like research as well, which is probably a really hard one too, because it's speculative. So cancer research, there's charities that collect money for research into all sorts of medical conditions. So and these charities are quite hard to they by definition sort of don't result in direct impacts, because they're not going to direct impacts. They're going to further science, right? And so there's some ones like that. I suppose as a general principle, though, you want to be donating to charities that spend more of your money going to a direct cause, because that's the reason you're donating in the first place. But I think charities are going to have overheads, right? And if they didn't have overheads, you'd probably question, well, what's that might raise even deeper questions if they didn't have people in the charity making sure they're allocating the money correctly, and that it's not going to line the pockets of local militia or gangs, or there's all sorts of they've got to have some costs to make the charity effective.
Yeah.
But the 99% example is probably would make most people squirm, I would have thought.
Yeah, and it's probably very, very hard to separate what is an administration cost, and there's no definition, I think, in a lot of ways on that. So it probably is quite misleading to try to look for one metric to compare all these different organizations. But I think it is an issue. We have spoken about a framework, or a movement, school of thought in past episodes called effective altruism. And essentially, I think that does at least try to put some, logic into how to approach this, both from a social movement kind of point of view, of a philosophy around it, but also how do you calculate benefits when doing good, right? And obviously charity is one part of that, and charitable organizations. So, they have a bunch of tenets that can be summarized. Obviously, this is a very high-level way, but they're really about a couple of things, right? So I'll kind of break it down. The first one is really doing good efficiently. So I think that's probably what they're most famous for, right? Which is that you could give that $100 to any number of organizations, but what is the best bang for buck? Who is looking at the optimization of you giving that $100 and the good it's going to do in the world, right? So that's a core tenet of the movement, and they do that through a range of metrics and things like that in sometimes quite actuarial kind of terms. And then I think they have a focus on this idea of long-termism. So basically understanding that we're not talking about small wins, we're actually talking about things on a much wider timescale. And I would say that it's been known to have a bit more utilitarian ethics. So this idea of consequentialism, things of that nature, that the morality of an action is much more linked to its outcome rather than what it looks like on the surface, right? Or another way of summarizing it is the means justify the ends, right? The maximize happiness, minimize suffering, I suppose. And so that cocktail has attracted a lot of people who prefer a much more solid framework for for giving, and there's been a bunch of organizations and resources that have popped up to really support this movement. And one we've spoken about in the past is 80,000 hours, which is a kind of great movement and resource as well. That's about understanding that you only have a certain amount of time to be productive in your lifetime. How do you best want to use that, right? Through giving your time versus giving your money, depending on your skill set, your circumstance, where you live. And it's like quite an interesting concept. I know that you have thoughts on it too, Andy, about, hey, this seems right up your alley, really. What's your take on it?
It's a no-brainer. Like, if you synthesize, I think, what the movement's all about into one thing, because you've mentioned quite a few, it's simply that, for whatever amount of money, well, there's probably two parts. One is we should give more than we currently do. But putting that to one side, if you are giving, then you want to make sure it's got, the biggest possible impact. And different people will have different ways of assessing or judging impact, and that's all open for debate. But there are categorically some causes and some initiatives which have a far bigger impact than others. So even like, given we have all different preferences and different things we want to achieve through our giving, even with whatever your preferences are, you can clearly and objectively say that some causes are better than others, and so we should be allocating our money to the causes that have the biggest impact. And you kind of touched on a little bit before when you were talking about, where does our responsibility end? Is it just giving the money and then that's it? You've job done sort of thing.
Yeah.
Well, and I think maybe a view that says job done and wash your hands of it after you've parted with your cash or whatever. That's probably a superficial view of people who only want to sort of appear to do the right thing, right? Whereas if you really truly care about the impact of the cause, like if you care about the causes, then you should care also about who you're giving it to, what they're doing with it, and like you should be thinking about it, every time you give your money over, right? And I think that's really what it comes down to. Now, whether that means it's, you're going to follow the literature right down to every last dollar, and you're going to work out, really complicated questions of, is it better to donate to scientists researching, the existential threats of AI, or whether it means you're going to just give to a charity that's going to provide bed nets in Africa. At least you've been a bit more thoughtful about it.
I like it because it does put more onus back on the giver, right? Because at least, you then have that obligation to decide what you want to do with your money, or what you want to do with your effort, and your own philanthropy. I always struggle with that word.
I not to cut you off, but one thing, where it comes a little bit unstuck, at least in the public eye, or at least where it can become a bit more debatable, is there's before one of the other sort of key things that they talk about is that you should donate, like if you're well off, you should donate a fairly significant proportion of your income towards charitable causes. So it's not just whether you want to give your 0.5% away to a good cause versus a bad cause. It's actually that you should be giving more than 0.5%, right? You should maybe 10% or something like that. Or even more. And I suppose where that comes unstuck is that, like, the theory is that if there's like more benefit to be yielded from you spending money on other people and other causes than yourself, then you're sort of morally obliged to do that. And then you come up, and that sort of flows through to examples of, should you spend $500 on a kid's birthday party versus $500 on, whatever cause, right? And ethically, almost you can't conclude that the $500 on a kid's birthday party is going to be more beneficial than just about any other cause. It's not plausible. So then the implication is, all right, well, we should never have kids' birthday parties, or we should never have anything. We should never spend any money on ice cream, and so and that's where I think people are really challenged by that and the implications of it.
Yeah, I want to talk a little bit about the giving pledge, right? Because this is something that raises alarm bells with me. I don't truly understand, and the cynic in me thinks it's all just a giant tax evasion scheme. So basically, I'm referring to something called the giving pledge, which is a commitment by a bunch of wealthy individuals and families to give away half or most of their wealth to charitable causes in their lifetime, right? So I think it was announced by it kickstarted in 2010 with the Gates, Bill and Melinda Gates and Warren Buffett and a bunch of other people, with the idea of collecting support in the wealthiest in American around the world. So, we've got billionaires such as, Elon's there, Richard Branson, Mark Zuckerberg, all the big ones. And to me, it's kind of, I don't quite understand it. But I am aware that creating a charitable organization does have a hell of a lot of tax benefits, right? You have to pay a bunch of tax. You can write that off. You can hire family members. You can spend the money to actually, while you can't spend the money directly, you can use that money in donations or your own that you would have paid to tax to influence people as well, right? So there's secondary benefits that come to you. You can donate to people that then gain you favor and position and stuff like that. I mean, am I being a cynic here? Is there funny business going on? Because it seems very hard to understand.
I think I don't disagree that they have ulterior motives, but I don't necessarily think it's tax related. I think the ulterior motive is, and maybe it's not necessarily a bad thing, but to confuse that this is genuine altruism on their behalf, as in, like, I mean, if this were like pure, genuine altruism and there was no other benefit to them in doing this, it probably wouldn't be as public. But I think if you're a billionaire and you've got all the money that you could ever need, and someone says to you, well, you can still have all the money you ever need. It's just that this other bucket of money that you're never ever going to touch in your life because you just don't need it. It's basically just it may as well be air, to you. It's that valuable to you. Then saying to everyone in the community that you're so generous and you're going to give this bucket of money that you're never going to touch in your lifetime because you couldn't possibly spend it even if you wanted to, you're actually going to give away, is saying to the rest of the community that you are a really good person. And it has this halo effect over these people, these billionaires who may even have a degree of guilt that they're so fortunate in the first place. And it absolves them of that guilt or that sense of, is it an injustice? Did I really earn it? And I think the psychological benefit that donating in this way has for these billionaires is actually a really significant private benefit to them. So even though they're giving money away to other people and other causes, really they're a fairly significant beneficiary too, in the sense that there's virtually nothing else that they could spend that money on that would yield them as significant a benefit as giving, right? Because it makes them feel good about themselves. It makes them feel upstanding and yeah, so I think what in history, like that's what altruism's kind of, it's not purely, I mean, sometimes pure altruism should be, there's nothing about yourself involved in doing that cause. But often, with charitable giving, there is like a big part of a benefit. It makes you feel good about yourself. And, those private benefits like actually have motivated people to give and fulfilling a sense of identity that you are a person that gives. So I think that's what's going on there with the billionaires. I don't know if there's a pure tax benefit. There might be, but I think it's predominantly them self-actualizing a image of sainthood about themselves.
All I'm thinking about now is that amazing quote in Iron Man 2 where he's talking, Ivan Vanko is talking to Tony Stark, and he's like, like all guilty men, you're now trying to rewrite your own history. And it's this idea of how you got that money and your privilege and your fortune, and obviously all sorts of different ways that money has been gained over time. You talked about altruism a lot there, and I think a very simplistic way when you start to think about this is, how would you define what is your flavor of altruism? From pure altruism that it does exist, this idea of wanting to help people for no other reason than that, full stop, to reciprocal altruism that you're doing it because you want that returned at some stage, and you realize that it's the best thing for the community and things like that, to, like you said, just pretending because you need the social credit, you need to you're doing it for your benefit. Where do you lie on that kind of? Where's your middle on altruism in general?
Well, my middle lies in the middle. I think I suppose every action has public and private benefits, right? And, a decision to give money to a charity has public benefits in that, yes, you're giving money to other people and that helps other people and that's a public benefit. But it also has a private benefit. It makes people feel better about themselves. It fulfills an identity. It makes other people feel more positively about them. It might even make people more likely to reciprocate, as in support that person if they ever need help. And that might be part of the historic role that organised religion played too, where you give some money when you're earning an income, and then maybe when you're older and you're, a pensioner, or maybe you don't even have a pension back in whichever century we're talking about. The church can help you out if you really are in need. So there's both, right? And I don't think it's a bad thing that there's both. In fact, that they're reinforcing only incentivizes more people. So the private benefit that you get from giving, whether it's because it makes you feel good about yourself or whatever, that encourages, and that's something that means that we actually have more charitable giving than we would have otherwise, right? So we have more of that public benefit than we would. So there's a very real sort of argument to say you shouldn't necessarily donate privately. So, I remember, as I said, a couple of episodes, I started reading up a bit about George Michael, and and one of the things I came across about him is that now it's probably not the most fruitful thing to donate, but I think he paid every year he paid to donate like a public Christmas tree for his local community, and but he didn't. It was never revealed that it was him paying for it, right? He did that privately.
Do you think it was a deal he got with the Christmas album, that he just had this,
yeah,
this
probably paid for with the royalties of Last Christmas? But one view is that that's very admirable that he did that privately, and maybe that's almost him kind of making a sacrifice that I'm this. Maybe that even reinforced the personal benefits to him, that I'm a person who doesn't give just for accolade. I give because I'm really a good person. So maybe that just reinforces that side of the private benefit. But there's like an argument to say, no, if you donate, you should, there's nothing wrong with people publicly, claiming credit, or at least, publicizing that they've donated, or having some wing named after them in some museum, because, that's why people donate money, because they want, if there's a benefit to them in terms of prestige or, reputation, then that encourages the act itself. So it's not such a bad thing. How about yourself?
I'm a little bit more on the skeptical side. I've never believed in true altruism. I always think that, and I'm the same with you in that way, that is okay. Like, again, the means justify the ends, right? It still means that there is more money for charitable causes to attempt to do more good. But what I do have a problem with is when people really try to fool themselves on it, and they kind of claim that virtuosity, or that kind of standing, and that's the part that I probably have a problem with. So I'm a little bit more on that side, that I don't think that everything in the end of the day is either for public benefit, maybe with a touch of therapeutic nature, like you said, in private, that they think better about themselves, or they're trying to ease the guilt in some way. And that's totally fine. But just, I think, don't pressure other people into it, and don't kind of claim that you are better than others because you do it. Maybe you haven't come to terms with exactly why, or some of the nature of what led you down that road. So that's kind of where I suppose I am on that subject.
So I want to ask you now a question, because you seem a little bit more pessimistic on charity than where I'm at. So how much of this, like in thinking about some of these issues, like the role of government versus the role of charities, and like that you pay tax, do you feel that, how much, like to what extent do you think that absolves you of an obligation to give to charitable causes?
I feel that in somewhere like Australia, where we have relatively high tax, and a lot of that pumped into social welfare and things like that, and health, I don't feel a direct tug that if, I don't go and place that, $50 note into the person around the corner on the street, that changes their life, or that reduces the resources that they have at their disposal. So I do kind of feel that kind of safety net is there. And maybe that's because I haven't explored it enough. And I'm sure that if I knew any of them on a personal level, I might feel differently. But I think that's the thing, right? And I do feel like this sometimes comes in from an Asian upbringing, that charity starts at home, but like literally my home. And I think this idea of like, for Asian communities and things like that, it's really about looking after your family and your local communities, and then kind of that rippling out. There's not this kind of idea of What I've kind of felt is there's not the idea of this random giving, right? It's actually, have you really done the work to make sure that the people living under your house, the people that you interact with in your community, your friends and family, your relatives, your local businesses and stuff like that, are you really understanding what they need? And if you're helping, are you spending your efforts there rather than just like, oh, I'm gonna cut the flying doctors a check and that's it. Like I've ticked that off the list. My mum raised me well. I give that every month. So I think that it's a different mentality for me because you can do both. You can do both, and if you have the means, maybe you should. But I do think that sometimes that random giving is at the expense of doing the community-based work that I think can make a difference.
Yeah, I think I'm probably somewhat similar, but I probably have a little bit slightly different views. So certainly I would agree that in Australia, so there's virtually no cause in Australia that I feel some great compulsion to give to, right? And that's mainly because we have effective government, right? Or at least my view would be if there's a cause that's not properly dealt with, then that's the fault of government. So, like homelessness, right?
Sorry, I should be laughing. I laughed at the wrong point when you said homelessness. I started laughing before you said that, so just for record. But why I was laughing was I was thinking, have you watched Flight of the Conchords?
No, I missed that one.
Oh, man. But anyway, there's this thing where I think they're trying to get close to this charity worker, and there's this really ultra niche charity. It's about like epileptic dogs. They have this like charity, and they're like,
I should use that as an example.
Think about the epileptic dog. Not every puppy can be so lucky. And like, but it's just like sometimes I feel like there's really micro niche causes, and when it's like we're just trying to promote awareness, like Merck and alopecia affects millions of people a year, kind of thing. I do think coming back to effective altruism, we're being distracted. And there's nothing wrong with that, right? There are benefits, social benefits, personal benefits, but don't pretend. Like, just take it for what it is, like one of your hobbies.
Well, I mean, yeah, and I think a lot of people would take up a cause because that forms part of their identity, right? It's that they're the person that cares about this group, and they might even have someone in their family or someone they know that's affected by that thing, and it's not quite about as you say, like an altruistic sort of, this is the cause that I think is really important. But I do think in Australia there's, we jumped off from homelessness, but like something like homelessness, right? There's virtually no point in my mind of donating to a charity that is aimed at addressing homelessness in Australia. And the reason I say that isn't because I'm cold-hearted, but because there are publicly funded services, and I would say that to the extent that they're not effective, then that would be my expectation. And, I'm sure there are gaps, right? And I'm sure there are areas where the services are deficient. Yeah. But in my mind, that's the role of government, right? And we are a rich country and we can afford to pay the taxes that we need to pay to resolve those sorts of issues. But so for that reason, I would be like you in that, it's not so much about, that for me is what the role of government's for. But, that said, most of the most pressing causes are not in Australia. So the most pressing causes are in countries where they don't have effective government. And that's the problem, right? And it's like, well, you almost need to like hack your evolutionary psychology, which is to care about your family and the people closest to you. You need to hack that and say, well, that helped us on the savannah, but actually what this is about is seeing through our natural instincts and saying, well, we didn't evolve to care about people, hundreds of thousands or thousands of kilometers away, right? We evolved to care about the people closest to us, and that's actually a flaw.
But don't you think though that level of thinking comes, like, I'm not going to wheel out Maslow's hierarchy of needs, but general fulfillment and safety and things like that within your bubble, that immediate one that you're talking about, albeit side resenting the Savannah comment, once those people are looked after, they can then spend more energy on looking outward, right? Like, don't you feel that there is a bit of a hierarchy before you get to that stage?
Oh, definitely. And there would still be people today who would say, I can't donate to charity because I've got a $3 million mortgage and, I'm not going to pay a cent to charity until I've paid off my $3 million house, and maybe add my $100,000 car in the mix as well, right? So charity is definitely something that comes easier to people who have disposable income and not much to do with it, right? But at the same time, this is about saying, well, you actually should have this at a much lower rung, than what you currently have it. So, like, the only way we can come to these conclusions, because they're not that we don't have instincts, like we don't have human instincts to give to people that we can't see, right? It's the classic example of when, they have a poster of, say, 1,000 starving children, right, on a poster to elicit donations, right? That poster is less effective at soliciting donations than just one starving child, right? Because the 1,000 starving children on a poster it gets lost, right? Whereas the one child, you see the emotion of the child, you react to you start thinking, what's the story of that one child, right? So our human instincts are not geared up to give to these remote causes we can't relate to, but we can to our family because we understand those. But that's really not where the need is. The need is actually abroad. And by the way, there would be some who would say that donating to support nutrition in Africa is not worthy, because what we really should be donating to is long-term research into to prolong human existence, because we're a flash in the pan of the total humans who are ever going to exist. So we should be investing in causes that help future generations, and that's where our focus should be.
Yeah.
So you can really cut this a lot of different ways, and some of them are a little bit uncomfortable, to be honest.
Oh, definitely. Before we move on, and why I use that example of the person on the corner or the homeless one, because I actually do have some personal examples with that. There was a lot of, for Sydney standards, not international standards or American standards, there's a fair bit of kind of rough sleepers and homeless people where I did my uni course, right, in that area. And I remember that obviously I was asking for some money or change. And one day I was walking with a group of friends, and I kind of have an attitude that I've already spelled out, that, you don't giving them money, it's not the right way to do it, potentially. But I had a friend who always used to give money. And it was always just a little bit because we were uni students. So, $10 here, $5 there kind of thing. But he got a part-time job. And one day he decided to give this homeless man $100.
Wow.
Right. $100 back in uni terms. Right. So I think it was like his first paycheck. He was living large. He shouted everyone Subway. It was a magical day. I even got a cookie. So he went by this homeless guy that he had given to money before, and obviously had spoken to, like, very superficially, gave $100. I was just thinking, what are you doing? $100, man. Like, that's a lot of money for a uni student. And then we went out and we were like, we had dinner that night, and we came back, and there was like a bit of a commotion where on the street we came and see what had happened. And essentially he had taken that $100, bought a bunch of booze and drugs, had a massive party, and was hit by a car. And, the police were there and people were there and all that kind of stuff. And obviously we were young then, right? This was just shocking. It was nothing more than that. But reflecting on it now, I kind of do feel like, again, where does your responsibility stop? Was it irresponsible to give $100 to that man in that condition, right? Because he's obviously dealing with some things. He's taken that money and harmed himself, and potentially others that he from his. So it does raise a bit of questions, right, sometimes. And I do feel like it's often the feel-good thing, the little dopamine hit that, if it gives you that dopamine hit from doing it, you need to slow down and question it, because it shouldn't be the primary reason why you're doing these things, right? And it can be very misleading. It feels good to give your kid, well, that's a bad example, but as I say, give your kid that, that those lollies or chips or whatever, you get the dopamine rush, but long term it's not good, right? And I think that you do have to be very careful about this stuff.
Look, I think to touch on the giving $100, like, that might seem as like, why would you do that? But he probably gets got quite a big sense of, even maybe a sense of power out of doing that, and probably got $100 worth of benefit for doing that, right? So I wouldn't dismiss it, but I guess in terms of the responsibility of it, I think in that situation, that's where charities themselves actually come into play, right? So we talked about the administration costs of running a charity. Well, partly the administration costs come from because you have to work out how to responsibly
exactly
give to people. So rather than give $100 to this lone guy on the street who, as you say, will go and, well, this guy did, but there's some probability that others would do the same on alcohol or drugs or whatever. That's why charities exist, to make sure it goes to the genuine, they intermediate the money, right? The goodwill to give. So it would be better for this guy to give $100 to a charity that supports homeless people, if that was his goal, than to give it to the individual. But then at the same time, that person wouldn't get the benefit of seeing the reaction of the face of the direct beneficiary of it. So there's this kind of charities, in some ways, kind of your money goes into this big pool of cash, and then the people who actually benefit from your money, you have no sense of the benefit. And that's that takes me back to thinking about World Vision. I think one of the things they did, which was I think a good strategy is in this regard, is you sponsor a child, right? So you have a child that you sponsor, and you get cards from that person every couple of months, and you see how they're going, and there's that, they write to you saying how grateful they are for your assistance or whatever. It gives a little, and I'm sure it's more marketing than there's probably just, they give you one kid, but that your money still goes into a pool that supports a community or whatever. But yeah, it's connecting those dots a bit better.
I was going to talk about World Vision because that was very, very popular when we were growing up, right? This idea of sponsoring a child. It was almost like it always felt very uneasy with me. It was like white people collecting Pokemon, exotic Pokemon, right? Like, oh, I've got a kid. Yeah, I've got a couple of kids, actually, maybe a few generations even, like I got my kid a kid. My kid's got a kid, right? And it felt very weird, right? And I know, like, the writing and the stuff, it was just like a very us and them. And it is us and them. I think that is the point, really. But I do wonder how much empathy the kids got from it. Maybe that did help. I'm not sure, because it wasn't something that we were engaged with at
Well, they had, but these chuggers, right, for World Vision, don't they have like tables, and then on the table they have pictures of the kids that you can sponsor, and it's like, I'll pick a child.
They got crosses through the ones they're taken. This one's on back order. Sorry. But you know what I mean? Like, it does feel a bit icky by today's standards. Back then there was none of this like white privilege, like white savior complex stuff. This was actually seen as a good thing, and I think it was. But when you really think about it, it's very problematic. And like, even this idea, like, you're going to help one kid, and like, they might have a brother or sister, but no, your money's gone to that one kid. But obviously, in reality, you need to help communities and stuff, and that's kind of what they do, right? But like you said, it's the marketing is trying to connect one person from the privileged Western world to one person in the disadvantaged third world, right? And that is a stroke of genius, right? Like, I think that is good. I'm not going to pull that apart, but I think by modern standards, it does feel.
But I remember maybe I can't even remember it might have been like the tsunami, the 2004 tsunami, or anyway, that a fairly significant event, and a lot of lives sort of affected. And I think a lot of charities did big recruitment, fundraising drives off it to come and donate to these communities affected or whatever. And they did raise like quite a lot of money. And
I think that was one of the first ones that had like social media lit a fire under it, wasn't it? And like with the hashtags and the movements and things like that, it spread. Yeah,
potentially. I don't quite remember the history of it. I remember telethons and all that sort of stuff, but they raised a ton of money, and I do recall there being some controversy over a charity where it turned out that yes, they'd raised money through that fundraising drive, but they'd actually only used part of the money towards servicing those communities, and that they actually, other parts of the funds that were raised were used for, their business as usual causes.
Yeah.
And I guess that's like an ethical question, right? So if you solicit donations off the back of, conveying that you're going to do A, but it turns out you do B with the money, then is that right? Or is it just, well, maybe that's suck it up, because at the end of the day, these causes are actually
I've been seeing some very scary numbers come out of the whole Black Lives Matter donations pool and where that money's going. But I do not have enough research to actually talk on that, so I won't. But I'll just drop it there as a curio. But I think that the charity industry is littered with those kind of things. There are so many. Like, you just have to go into Google. There is a graveyard of like fraud and misuse and all sorts of paybacks and stuff like that. Like, one really funny one I was reading about was like this service that used to fly planes to rescue dogs that would have been put down. I think it was like paws that soar or something like that. And the guy tricked people into like thinking that he needed his own. It was more economical if you buy me my own private jet, because then I could save even more instead of just like all these costs around fuel and things.
I'm just in my head picturing like the climate change charity coming after that charity.
They're chasing each other in their own planes. But the funny thing was though, when he finally got caught and he had to pay back all this money and he wasn't actually saving many dogs or anything, and spending all this money on his mortgage and all this kind of stuff, when they contacted the people for a refund, the donors, they said, even if this motherfucker saved one dog, I'm in and I'm okay with it. Like that's how strong the urge is to do good, right? And to kind of like hope that I'd rather think that my money saved at least one dog than was like embezzled in 1,000 ways. And this guy's like rocking up on his private jet, right? But yeah, that was an interesting one. But there's so many,
I just want to maybe this is something to close on is we've talked a little bit today about, you know, effective altruism and giving to most, you know, highest impact causes, right? And we talked a bit about like altruism. Is it truly altruistic and all that sort of stuff?
Dollar for dollar, it always comes down to mosquito nets. Always.
That could be, yeah. I'm just thinking like if every effective altruist dollar goes to mosquito nets, we'll have an oversupply very quickly. But so what I want to put forward is this notion, like, does it matter, right? Like one of the strongest arguments for just not caring about like the cause that it donates to is that if you tug at the heartstrings of someone like cute little puppy dogs or whatever, and, you know, we might say that charity is low impact and not effective. But if that tugs at the heartstrings and someone wants to give to it, then if we just if we just basically have a view that unless like every dollar that's donated should go to, as you mentioned, mosquito nets, then like that doesn't inspire people and people are not going to give, right? So you kind of need to create like a space for people to have their hobby causes that maybe are low impact, but you know what? If they're not going to give to the other causes, so you may as well give them choice and you may as well have a diverse market of different causes, and the total amount given in that world where you have diversity of choices and diversity of causes that excite people, you'll have more money donated, and then maybe that frees up money that can be spent on, you know, on really impactful causes. So, yeah, what are your thoughts on that?
I totally agree. You know, everyone needs a hobby. And actually, I think there's a lot of personal fulfillment and the pool's bigger. I'm sure Ben Lee will let everyone use that "We're All in It Together" song. He always does.
We'll get a strike.
But no, I'm with you, right? Like I just don't like when it's used for virtuous reasons to like hold over other people. But everything else I'm fine with. I want to end, Andy, on one question to you, one hypothetical, which is if you were donating your money or you were going to do something with your time purely for the public good, to show people how amazing Andy was in the most like gregarious way, what would it be?
Oh, geez. I think I would probably buy another 10,000 mosquito nets.
Just make like a monument full of mosquito nets. Just trade them over people.
I don't know. Or maybe one giant mosquito net for Africa. So
just the whole of Africa.
I think there's maybe a new wing at the I don't know. Do they like? I did see when I was in New York the David Geffen wing of Museum of Modern Art, and thought, oh yeah, that's pretty badass.
I always find it weird, like when you dedicate something and you have like a plaque or a statue or a picture made, like how socially acceptable is it to choose, like how close to your actual like physical look or age do you have to go? Can you go like really young? Just go, oh, like I want a picture when I was like 10 years younger. Can you like model it on this? Because yeah, it's like I often think about, I came back from London and there's that amazing Churchill statue that overlooks the Parliament, and it's like, this guy's already a ghoul. Like surely he would have wanted a younger image, but I guess that's how everyone knows him.
Yeah. It wouldn't look the same though. It wouldn't look right. You know, well, him in his Boer War uniform.
See, I'm more of a man of the people when it comes to overt shows of charity. Like I'm thinking something way more like grassroots. I'm thinking like they wheel me out in the Pope-mobile or the back of a truck and I've got like a turkey cannon, You know how like sports stars always go to their hometowns and they give out turkeys like for Thanksgiving, especially if they come from poor neighborhoods, and it's like they just have like hundreds of turkeys, right? Like look it up. Like I think it's really popular in the NBA. There's like one guy that gives out like 800 turkeys, Shaq's all over it. I just get a cannon. You know how like they shoot out T-shirts at an NBA game, but this one shoots turkeys. I just like fucking.
I think you should innovate by doubling down on the bin chicken.
Ooh,
frozen bin chickens.
The Ibis cannon. I think we have to try one now. No, we should edit that up, actually.